Hi, I'm attorney Eric Lewis with Lewis Legal Services in Indianapolis. Today I want to talk briefly about how your payment in a Chapter 13 is calculated. So let's start with talking about your debt. Many people are surprised to learn that a Chapter 13 payment in some cases can be calculated without knowing much about the debt that you have, or at least the amount of debt. The reason for that is because most Chapter 13 cases are based on somebody's ability to pay back their debt, not necessarily the amount. So it doesn't matter whether your debt adds up to $50,000 or $250,000. The court in a Chapter 13 case, in most cases, is looking at your monthly ability to pay back your debts over a certain amount of time, typically a time frame between 36 months and 60 months. That duration of time is what we call the commitment period. And it's dictated by your gross income as averaged over the previous 6 calendar months to the calendar month in which your bankruptcy case is filed. So you file your bankruptcy case and they're looking at the income, gross income, in those 6 previous months. And when we take that income, we average it and then annualize it, it's compared to certain median household income numbers published by the Department of Justice for use in bankruptcy cases based on your household size. So if your gross income is under the median household income for your family size in your particular state, then the commitment period is 36 months. For good cause, you can do longer than 36 months, but 36 months is the minimum. If you're over median income, then you have to do a 60-month commitment, minimum commitment period. So in every case, they're going to look at your ability to pay, which is an analysis of your income versus your reasonable and necessary expenses and what's left over to pay your creditors on a monthly basis. Now, some cases have a minimum amount that must be paid, and that can be due to 2 reasons. One, you have non-exempt property that you want to keep that triggers what we call a liquidation analysis. Or another reason could be that you have debt that has to be paid back in full, which we call priority debt. Debts in bankruptcy are not all created equal. Some debts are what we call general unsecured debts, like credit cards, medical bills, broken leases, repos, and so on. These debts have the lowest priority in terms of payment, and it's possible in many Chapter 13 cases to only pay back a fraction of these debts, and upon the completion of the terms of your repayment plan, you get a discharge at the end of any remaining liability on these debts. Priority debts, on the other hand, are debts that must be paid back in full, like tax debt that's recently incurred, child support arrearage, those are some of the more common examples. So for example, let's say you have $20,000 in federal income tax debt that's a priority debt. Irrespective of your ability to pay, the Chapter 13 case is going to require that you pay enough each month for every month of the plan to pay off that tax debt because it gets priority. If you have other debts in that same bankruptcy proceeding and they only get pennies on the dollar for every dollar that you owe, that's okay. But the priority debt must be paid. So in cases where there's no priority debt, the payment may be based simply just on what you can afford to pay. Now, I had mentioned earlier about that liquidation analysis, and that can make things tricky. So a lot of Chapter 13 cases don't worry about a liquidation analysis because the person's property and assets are all exempt under law. But here's an example of where we see it come up. So let's say you own a house and that house is worth $300,000 and you have a mortgage on it for $200,000. That means you have gross equity of $100,000. The homestead exemption for a person's primary residence in Indiana is currently only $22,750. So that means you're able to shield that amount from your creditors. But once you deduct that exemption, you have exposed equity of roughly $77,000. So that means that your Chapter 13 plan has to pay back at least what your creditors would receive in a hypothetical sale of your home. Now, you don't lose your house in Chapter 13, but they do calculate what creditors would receive if your house was sold in a Chapter 7 proceeding. So in this example, If a Chapter 7 trustee could sell your house for $300,000, pay off your $200,000 mortgage, give you your $22,750 exemption, there would be money left over after the cost of sale, including the trustee's fees after they were deducted, money left over to distribute to your creditors. And whatever that amount is, let's say for our example that after the dust settles, that amount is $50,000. Again, you don't lose your property. They're just looking at what creditors would receive in a hypothetical sale. And if the amount was $50,000, then in that case, your Chapter 13 would have to pay back at least $50,000 to your unsecured creditors. What happens if you only owe $30,000, for example? Then in that case, your Chapter 13 would require that you pay back 100% of your debt over the course of that commitment period that we discussed. Now, there are a lot of other wrinkles and fine details that can vary from case to case, but using these ballpark figures, for example, this is what a liquidation analysis would look like. And it's not limited to real estate. It could be anything, really everything that you have that's above and beyond what the law allows you to exempt. Some people have entirely exempt property and this doesn't come up at all. Because of the rise in home prices since the pandemic, we're seeing a lot more and more people who are essentially house rich but money poor, meaning they would lose their house if they did a Chapter 7, and they can't afford a Chapter 13 because of the equity in their home makes that monthly payment too high for them to afford. But that's it for today. If you have any questions, please contact my office. If you want to stay up to date on developments in bankruptcy law and other related things, please click subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.